the world model. What I mean by a world model is probably best illustrated by robots. When people make robots that can move around in the world, they're given a world model. And this world model would include simple things such as the ground is below you, the sky is above you. If you meet a solid vertical object, that's a wall or a pillar or something. If you need to move, if you're in a house, you need to move from one room to another, you need to find a door. So it's context basically. It's giving the computer brain a model of the world within which it can navigate. So for instance, if our computer program, excuse me, for our robot said go from the bedroom to the family room, that computer program would feed into the robot. The robot would then compare it to its world model and say, okay, well, I've got to move along the floor. I can't move along the ceiling because that's up. I would fall over. I've got to navigate walls. I've got to find a door in or an opening in those walls. And that's the context to how I navigate from one room to another. So the world model is extremely important, and that provides the context against which all of the incoming information and all of the incoming commands and instructions are referenced. This is very important in terms of human perception because humans also carry a world model. They carry a world model that we're taught. It's not the only world model because there's a sort of intuitive moral world model as well. Do our feelings say this is healthy and right, or do they say, hang on, this just doesn't feel right? But apart from that, there is a conceptual world model which we're taught by family, friends, teachers, the society in which we live, our religion, and also our experiences. So for instance, if we're brought up in a certain religion or a certain society that has very strict ways, our world model is programmed with those ways. So that's our frame of reference. And also, as this is modified as it goes along, if, let's say for argument's sake, we have very challenging relationships and they don't turn out very well, that programs additionally into that world model. Relationships are hard and relationships suck. So that's what we call the polymorphic programming. So we're given the basic world model by the people who influence us as we're growing up, and then it's modified through experience. So if you have lots of car crashes, your world model says driving is extraordinarily dangerous. If you don't, it may say it's ridiculously easy and you may end up having lots of car crashes. So it reprograms from experience as it goes along. That polymorphic element is how people can get manipulated. That's one of the gateways into manipulation to change people's world model. Now, manipulation and propaganda very much change that world model. And this is one of the reasons that intellect is no insulator from propaganda or manipulation. Because what happens is, if there's an obvious attempt to manipulate you, something, people just tell you something that you can obviously see is not correct, it's unlikely to have any effect on you. But what propaganda and manipulation seek to do is they seek to use that polymorphic programming, that reprogramming of the world model, slowly but surely, but over time, like a drip feed, to gradually swing your world model and create a context that is actually incorrect, is wrong. So for instance, we see a lot of drip feed of Susan is not trustworthy, she cheats on her boyfriend, she's late at work, whatever. You hear that once or twice, it's not necessarily going to influence you greatly. But if people set up a web to manipulate that so that every time you hear about Susan from a range of different people, it's always given in a context of Susan being untrustworthy, it starts to change the programming of that world model. Now, because this is below the primary daily consciousness, it happens subliminally, almost subliminally, so that gradually you suddenly find the context of, oh, Susan, she's untrustworthy. So a lot of manipulation and propaganda is based on reprogramming the world model. And the thing is that does happen very subliminally, and it's quite easy to do. And we really have no defense against it unless we're very aware of it, unless we're very aware how our perception works. So one of the things that has been used in social media to great effect is to drip feed false information in a range of ways that also, in a range of modes and a range of contexts that all lead to the same story. For example, that Hillary Clinton is untrustworthy, or Obama screwed the economy, or whatever it may be. It's presented in a range of ways. So it gradually swings that world model to the point where as soon as that person's name is mentioned, immediately the context is be on the defensive, don't trust the information. And this happens, it's very, very effective. And even if we are quite consciously objective, or we believe we're quite consciously objective, it actually does work, and it can work, and it works very powerfully unless we are very, very aware. We employ a filter, and that filter has to be that we can only absorb things that we can directly see and experience, so that we don't use constructs such as trust. Trust and belief are two of the villains of the piece, because what happens is we set up, for argument's sake, a construct of I will trust in John until he proves me otherwise. So we're not basing anything on the evidence we get. We're setting up a false premise and then modifying it for the evidence we get. So again, this is not an objective process. What we need to do is to have no view or opinion or trust of anybody or anything, and gradually only modify, only allow this polymorphic program to come in based on real solid experience, not the stuff we read, not the stuff people tell us. And that requires a lot of conscious effort. This is a very top-line description. We'll go into much more detail, and it is really quite complex and interesting the deeper you go. Many of you may already be aware of what I'm telling you and go, oh yeah, and all this. Trust me that as we go deeper, you'll start to see it is more interesting, and it's not quite as obvious. It's much more subtle than many of us realize. So to summarize about the world model, if we can distort somebody's world model, we can distort how they see groups of people, such that whatever evidence is presented to them, it's always compared to the world model, and the answer that comes out is incorrect. To go back to our little robot, if we went into him or her and we reprogrammed and said, you walk through walls, you can't walk through doors, that robot's going to crash and burn. Or you have to walk on the ceiling, you can't walk on the floor. That what comes out when the robot takes in the information and compares it to the world model is going to be upside down. For the purposes of the world model, just accept that manipulation and propaganda, from the workplace all the way through to big political campaigns, friends who wage hate campaigns, whatever, what happens is they're trying to modify the world model of you or somebody else, so that whatever evidence is presented is not accurately evaluated. It's evaluated against a false context, so that manipulates, that distorts the outcome, the conclusion, to how the person doing it wants the outcome to be. So for argument's sake, somebody who can be seen to be quite trustworthy, you no longer trust them.